In number 60 of section 5.1, we want to prove that this is not an identity. So since I want to show it's not an identity, I just need to find one example where this does not hold true. So I can find any theta that it doesn't work for, and then I know it's not an identity. Even if it is true for some identities or some thetas, if it's not true for all of them, then it's not an identity. So I just need to find one contradiction. So that's a counterexample. So actually I'm going to call that a counterexample, not an example. One counterexample of its truth, and then we know it's not an identity. So I'm looking for something that's easy to add. Just trying to make my life a little simpler. So one of the angles that I know that's easy to add would be, I'm going to let theta equal pi over 2, which equals 2 pi over 4 to make it easier to add to the pi over 4. So I'm going to plug that in and see what happens. So I get cosine of pi over 4 on the left, plus cosine of, I'm plugging in my theta now. I'm plugging in theta that for that. So I get, or either one of those, pi over 2. And I want to know if it's not, kind of want it to be not equal to find that counterexample. So I add pi over 4 plus pi over 2. And I noticed I used pi over 2, but really 2 pi over 4 would be easier to add. So I'm going to, on the right-hand side, I'm going to change that to get a common denominator to 2 pi over 4, which gives me cosine of 3 pi over 4. And if I look at my unit circle, I find that cosine of 3 pi over 4, that's over here. So that's x is going to be negative. So that's a negative radical 2 over 2. On the left-hand side, I have cosine of pi over 4 is positive radical 2 over 2. And cosine of pi over 2, that's the top of the circle, so that's right here. So cosine is 0 there. And I get a positive radical 2 over 2, and those are not equal. So that is a counterexample. So that shows that this is not an identity because of the one counterexample that we found of theta equal to pi over 2. There could be other counterexamples, so this is certainly not the only way to prove it. This is just the one that I chose. Again, you only have to find one, so there's a lot of different ways to do it.